Some people think nighttime is a time for rest, for dreams, for escape. And maybe that's true. For the city dispatcher, the graveyard shift is something different. It's waiting and it's listening for the stories people tell themselves in the dark between heartbeats. The city shrinks at night. Its pulse slows without dying. And I take my seat at the dim corner desk, the glow of my monitor bright in the otherwise hushed dark. Outside, sodium lights paint colorless shadows across empty sidewalks, while somewhere beyond, a distant ambulance flashes but doesn't hurry. I'm not new to this. You see, nights have their own rhythm, a cadence you learn by rote. Ring, click, voice, entry, dispatch. It's over and over like this until sunrise. The monotony is a kind of comfort, though. This hour is about routine, about stacked papers, lukewarm office coffee, the faint hiss of police radio in the background. I know the sound of my own breathing in this room. But boredom here is responsibility. Quiet means nothing's gone horribly wrong. Yet, and on these shifts, I become the city's nerve endings. I feel its bruises, its old wounds. I feel the weight of every cry for help. Now it sounds dramatic, but imagine this. You spend hours every night as the guardian of stories that no one else hears. You're the bridge between disaster and rescue, panic and calm. One missed detail, one moment's distraction, and something irretrievable might happen. Something irreversible. So yeah, the silence is never quite as peaceful as it seems. There's company of sorts, the regulars whose oddities fill the emptiness and add color to a black and white routine. There's an elderly man on Peach Street who reports phantom cats every Thursday after midnight, always exactly 4 o'clock. A woman from the apartment block nearby who calls about the glowing eye she sees outside of her window, as if the city's feral cats have learned to use flashlights. A kid who prank calls, swearing at me in a new accent each week, determined to make me laugh. Then there are the people for whom the world always seems a little off-kilter. The old woman who reports that her TV speaks back to her in riddles, or the lone janitor who says he smells roses in subway tunnels after 2 a.m. I've learned to sort these all into categories. Harmless, lonely, possibly in need of a welfare check, or just plain bored, talking to fill the void. But their stories are the background music of my job. Tonight the air feels strange from the beginning. Maybe it's the way the breeze presses against the window, or how the clock seems to stutter rather than tick. And on nights like this, fatigue presses heavier, and every swallowed yawn feels like a secret. The phone sits silent a little too long, and I tap my own notes, listening for something nameless. I tell myself it's nothing, and I try to imagine the sunrise. But somewhere, just at the edge of my awareness, past the boundaries of routine and comfort, I sense something waiting to be noticed. A knot in the night's tapestry, if you will. Something is about to make tonight stand apart from every other shift I've ever pulled. It's not fear. Well, not yet. It's anticipation. It's sour and electric all the same time, sparking at the tip of my tongue. Tonight, this city is going to call, and when it does, it'll change everything. The first oddity comes in at 1:53 a.m., when the city is wrapped tightly in its own stillness. My first thought when the phone jolts me from my reverie is simple relief. But my monotony is interrupted. I reach for the receiver out of habit, ready for another harmless midnight musing. But the caller's breathing is shallow and syncopated, as if she's trying to count down to something. There's a pause so thin that you could miss it, then the smallest scrape, perhaps nails on plastic, before her voice slides down the line. "Hello?" she whispers, not the desperate edge that I'm used to and not the tremulous relief from hearing a human voice across the void, but it was something that ticks behind each syllable. "It's in the laundry chute," she says. It's singing. A metallic edge creeps into her voice, a tremor that doesn't quite match the shape of fear. Not words, but I know it's for me. Have you ever heard anything like that? Have you? The line is filled with humming, low and melodic, just enough to set my teeth on edge. It's not interference. It's coming from her end. My brain runs through the expected. Perhaps a prank, a breakdown, pipes settling, an animal. I'm already half tuning her out, scribbling keywords, possible welfare check, address confirmation, isolated incident. You know, falling back on all my training. The process at this point is automatic. But as she talks, my eyes sweep the screen for her history. Nothing. Not one previous call. Not even a parking ticket. Her voice gets softer and so does the humming until both fade out at once, an abrupt end. And for a moment I sit there motionless, replaying the conversation in my head. Very little of the city unsettles me anymore, but there's something about her stillness, her controlled terror, that gets under my skin. Not even 10 minutes pass before another call pops up. This one's from Elm Avenue. It's a man, his voice stretched thin and warbly. He's babbling about people on the roof. Except the roof is inside his house, over his bed. "It's cold in here," he keeps saying, but the thermostat says it's 72. The call is punctuated by rhythmic tapping, too ordered to be random, but too strange to be explained. I hang up and log both calls, overlaying their details absent-mindedly. Elm is just 4 streets from the first woman. I mean, that doesn't mean anything, does it? And I'm still trying to rationalize if there's a logical answer. There almost always is. Maybe someone's pranking the neighborhood, or there's a busted HVAC line that runs through both properties. I note it and move on. But then, a third call. This one's from a payphone. I mean, who still uses those? I almost dismiss it as a default system glitch, except the voice is wet, as if speaking through a cloth. They're whispering again. Then there's static on the line, a sharp pop, and what I swear is a child's giggle before the line drops completely. For the first time in years, I feel my pulse actually race. 3 calls, none quite alike, but a thread ties them together. The beginning of something not seen but definitely felt, something pressing at the seams of each story. I want to believe it's coincidence or collective insomnia, the city's old trick of bleeding night into nightmare, but the pattern is settling across my nerve like a spider's web. I hover over the log system, poised between rational dispatcher and something closer to a believer. A voice inside of me, half mockery, half warning, whispers, "Not every story has an answer that you'll like." And the night isn't halfway done yet. Now what comes next, though, is a deluge. I can't say what precisely triggers the shift, only that one moment I'm enmeshed in old irritations and small-town weirdness, and the next I'm slammed by a succession of calls that erode the edges of normal. Let me give you a glimpse. 2:21 a.m. The call almost slips by. It's a soft rustling, barely more than static, then calls the sound of restrained breath, ragged and wet, as if the caller's trying to speak but can't stop himself. "Is this 911? He whispers, the words feeling sticky. "There's a man at the top of my hallway." He's staring at me. I can't move. Metal clinks in the background, the faint trembling whine of pipes and old walls. I ask for a description, and the caller takes a few seconds to answer. Well, he looks like my father, but his mouth, it just keeps opening and closing, like he's trying to swallow the whole room, but no sound comes out. He whimpers a frail animal sound. He's not breathing. Should he breathe? And while I type up the response, possible intruder, mental health crisis, a sudden guttural exhale comes not from my headset, but right beside my own ear in the dispatch bay. Too quick and sudden and close. I jolt, nearly dropping my coffee, and when I go back to the line, it's dead. All that's left is the tail end of the heavy, drawn-out breathing, like an echo living inside of my head. 2:37 a.m. The next emergency comes faster, emotions running hot through the line. A woman sobs so violently the sound vibrates my headset, and for a long second she only gasps, no words forming. My shadow, it's gone wrong, she finally moans. I keep seeing it in the kitchen when I'm still in bed. Sometimes it walks right in front of me, blocking out the stove light. It looks at me with no eyes at all. Please, what if it leaves? What if it comes back with company? I tried to calm her, ask her about what medications she's on, about her neighbors, about recent stress, anything to get her anchored into shared reality, anything to get a little bit more information from her. But her responses fray, turning harsher and more desperate. It's not me, she insists. It's not mine. A sudden screech of static makes me pull back. Then, silence. Her line cutting off in a bone-dry snap. 2:58 a.m. The boards light up again. This time it's an old man calling from his musty sinkhole apartment on Fairmont. He's laughing, but underneath there's a shrillness, a rising terror. There's water coming out of the sockets, he says. It's not normal water, though. Not cold and not hot. And it tastes like sweet, like syrup. Can water be sweet? As he describes it, my mind darts between pipe failure and diabetic confusion. But he keeps talking, his voice drifting as if into sleep. It runs up the walls and doesn't drip down. The lights keep flickering and I think I see things on the ceiling. Faces crawling around with little tiny baby hands. He shudders, then lets out a bubbly groan. They know I can see them now. And just before the call is lost, I hear the sound of something soggy slapping tile, and for some reason, this chills me more than his words. Shortly after, another rings in, this one from a payphone half a mile from the previous caller. The connection is rough and full of wind. The voice is warbled and muffled, as though the speaker's mouth was swathed in fabric or even submerged. They're whispering again, the person rasps, genderless, young, or impossibly old. They don't want me to leave. The coins in my pockets are warm. That's wrong. There's a sudden burst of high, tinkling, childlike giggling, and then the call dies. My display glitches for half a second, showing unfamiliar runes instead of numbers. 3:18 a.m. A man calls in, quivering at the edge of panic. His TV, he says, keeps flipping to something that isn't any channel. All the numbers are static, and there's faces there, close to the glass. He swears the faces are talking to his daughter, a 3-year-old who keeps answering with the words he's never heard any living voice before. I ask if he could wake his wife or get out, but he only whimpers. She's with him. Every call, no matter the neighborhood, now shares small impossible details, unseasonably odd. unseasonably odd, faces in places they shouldn't be, the sense that the city's electric web is alive with a pulse of its own. And behind all the panic, there's a certain rhythm, a humming, as if every caller might be tuned to the same eerie radio station. But by this point, I stop pretending these are isolated incidents. The city is coming unwound, and somewhere in the tangled lines and whispered words, I sense all these voices reaching for one another, and for me. Now I try desperately to keep my professional mask on, logging details, cross-referencing caller addresses, flagging for welfare checks and mental health emergencies. I use clinical language, unknown disturbance, disoriented, possible hallucination, but the words feel hollow, a spell I'm weaving just to distance myself from what's piling up around me. There's a point where protocol becomes something to hide behind, not a tool for real understanding. As the clock inches past 3:30, my hands start to tremble every time the phone rings. There's a pressure rising in the room, a certainty that all these calls aren't random, but part of something growing, an intelligence straining to make itself known. I'm used to organized chaos, but my skin crawls, and the air vent in the ceiling above me turns into a faint humming. And then, out of nowhere, every screen on my console flickers for just a second. In the ghosted black, I catch the impressions of many eyes staring at me unblinkingly before the lights snap back, and a heartbeat later, another call comes. It's the breaking point for me. A child's voice, unsteady but weirdly composed. "Hello?" Soft. And when I ask the address, there's a muffled shuffling, as if the phone is bundled inside of a blanket. "I'm cold," the voice barely says above a whisper. "Can you see me?" A loud knock echoes through the line, then 3 knocks, slow and sure, matching some inner rhythm I know from nightmares but never recall upon waking. "I think it's in the hallway now. It looks just like Mommy, but her eyes are closed. Can you hear it breathing?" The words wrap up tight around my chest. In the background, I do hear something though, a ragged animal rasp. The call again ends so suddenly that my own breath explodes out in its absence. I start looking at my hands. They're shaking badly now, and the detachment is gone. I feel exposed, as if whatever has taken over my shift isn't limited to the callers anymore. My screen, the glass in the office, the warped reflections in the polished desk, all seem suddenly suspect, as if something is growing stronger with every strange report. It feels like hours before another call comes in, yet the clock's red eye tells me it's only minutes, and dawn is still so far away. The silence that fills the small dispatch room after the last call isn't comforting or familiar. It's oppressive. It's almost physical, settling around my shoulders like a sodden blanket. And at 4:58 a.m., there'll be no more calls. Not tonight. I could feel it, as if whatever rift opened in the city's collective night mind is closing again, satisfied with what it's let through. I close my eyes for a second. The edges of the monitors flicker as I blink, and I hear only the regular tonal beeps of the unyielding machinery on the wall. The world outside hinting at morning with a pale, dirty glow seeping through the grime of the window above my desk. I'm exhausted, but sleep feels quite impossible. My pulse ferrets around underneath my skin. The other dispatchers filter in, laughing at an inside joke, punching the coffee machine awake. They nod at me, not quite seeing the pallor in my face, or the careful, measured way that I move. I want to tell someone about the calls. Really explain them, you know? Make them understand what they felt like. But the words die in my throat. It's as if saying them out loud would make them real in a way I'm not prepared to handle. Instead, I stay after my shift ends, combing back over the night's log. I look for patterns, cross-reference names and dates, check for shared last names, for power outages, for police reports of prowlers or break-ins. I look up paranormal events in the neighborhood, mass delusions, lunar anomalies, anything that might wedge some sense between me and the things that I heard. But the paper trail is cold. The calls exist. And, well, they kind of don't. I mean, sure, the logs are there. The tapes play back, but the rationale stops at the edge of the inexplicable. When I get home and collapse into bed, the night replays in fragments. I jolt awake each time I almost slip into a dream, convinced some hand will knock at my door with a slow, certain rhythm. I stare at the thin line of the streetlight carving up my bedroom wall, imagining voices barely above music, humming in through the air vents. I try to share what happens with friends and co-workers later that week, even drop hints on an anonymous dispatcher's forum. But my story sounds unmoored, a little unhinged, and each person's polite smile or raised eyebrow tells me I'll get no comfort there. One coworker suggests that it was a fluke, maybe a local group pulling a coordinated prank. But too many details stick, and too much of it felt way too real. It clings to me like a blur I cannot shake. The nights pass, but the city is different now. Perhaps I am too. It does creep in slowly how much has changed. A week goes by, and then a month, and then the world fails to snap back into its old, reassuring shape. That invisible barrier between routine and the unknown feels thinner, almost transparent. Sometimes at 2 or even 3 a.m., I'll look down at an empty street or listen to a caller's story and wonder, what is waiting there, just past the reach of headlights and logic? I did start signing up for more night shifts, resisting the urge to admit why. There's a tension in me now, half dread and half really interested. Some part wants to hear that humming again, to witness whatever lurks at the city's edges. I notice details others seem to shrug off. A cold draft in a room with sealed windows, a child peering too intently into the shadows behind their own reflection, small patterns and repetitions within the calls themselves. And my world does narrow. I lose touch with some friends. I begin to dwell in the forums and chat rooms for insomniacs, dispatchers, amateur investigators. Hell, I even ask strangers questions about things that don't make sense. And at home, I keep the lights on all the time. And yet, oddly, I'm really not that afraid. Not in the old way of me being afraid when I used to take a strange call. I walk the city at sunrise, breathing in the hush, wondering how much of what we know is invented for the convenience of daylight. I want you to think about that. How much of what we know is invented for the convenience of daylight? You see, my career shifts. I train new dispatchers differently now. I teach them not only the scripts and the buttons, what to say, what not to, but to listen for the tremble behind a caller's voice, to treat even the impossible with a grain of absolute respect. Eventually, I come to embrace the uncertainty of the life. Life is stranger than what we want to admit, and maybe every shadow has its reason. Every impossible story a grain of truth. Something that broke that night within me, though. A seal between reality and possibility, and I can never quite seal it again. So I will leave you with all of this. If the world began whispering to you through static or even silence? Would you listen? How much of our ordinary is just a fragile lie we all agreed to keep? And if you peered into the darkness and it gazed back at you, what would you do?